We continue now at the top of Daf Yod Aleph Amid Beis Mesechet Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 11b. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, how can it be that when you have public korbanos, let's say of the previous year, they weren't able to be brought, and so the halacha is they can't be brought in the next year if they were purchased with funds of the Trumas Halishka from the previous year. So the halacha is, if it's a public korbanos, so then you're able to redeem that even without it developing a mum. And the same is true by the Mosra HaKetores, the leftover Ketores from the previous year. That also can be redeemed. And the Gemara in the previous summit said that the way it works is leiv bezdin masna aleim. It's like there's a stipulation that if they are used this year, so then we say that it has that kedushas haguf. But we say that if it is not used this year, so then it just has a kedushas damim. That's what the Gemara explained on the previous summit. And the Gemara now is in the middle of asking on this from a brisa. The brisa says if you have the par and the soyer of Yom Kippur, v'chein seirei avodah zara, and similarly if you have the goats of avodah zara, she'avdu, in all of these cases the animals got lost, v'hifresh acherim tachtei, and so they separated other animals instead of them. And then let's say these animals are found later. So the halacha is kulon yamusu. All of these animals are left to die. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Lazar of Rabbi Shimon Omrim. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon, they say yiru ad sheyistavu. They should be left to graze until they develop a blemish. V'yimachru v'yiplu demein linadava. Then once they have a blemish, they can be sold, and their money, the money that you get from selling them, can be used for donations to the Beis Hamikdash. She'ein chatos tzibor mesa, because the public chatos, the community chatos, is not left to die. And so the Gemara asks, V'amai, now why is this true? Leima leiv bezdin masna leim. We should say the same thing. We should say that there's a stipulation over here, and that you should be able to redeem it even without a blemish. Rashi explains, Par v'sor shel Yom HaKippurim, shein chatos hapnimios, these are inner chatos, the inner mizbeach, v'chein seirei avodah zara, and similarly when it comes to the seirei avodah zara, tzibor shechatu b'avodah zara, that refers to if the community sins with avodah zara, b'horas bezdin, based on the ruling of bezdin, mevi'in par liolo sar lechatos, so they bring a par, a bull as a carbanola, and they bring a goat as a chatos. Again, that's also an inner soyer, so to speak. You place the blood on the paroches and also on the inner mizbeach, the golden mizbeach. Like it says in Zvachim in Perek Beis Shammai. And so the halacha according to Rabbi Yehuda is kulan yamusa, they all are left to die. The lo damu l'sirei haragolim. It's not similar to the goats of the regel. T'tanan behu b'masnisin, because for those we said in our Mishnah, lo karvu b'regel zeh yikruvu b'regel acher. So we said if it's not brought this holiday, you bring it the next holiday. Aval elu einon ru'in ad yom hakippurim l'shana haba. But here, with the karbonos we're talking about over here, you're not going to be able to bring them until the next year's Yom Kippur. Uchvar avra lo shana. Now the year already passed. V'hava lehu mitruma yishana. So it's going to be from the old funds, which is problematic. So that's why they have to die. It's the same halacha by a carbon chatos where the owner already got his atonement. There's halacha l'Moshe Misinai that 5 carbon chatoses that are meant to die. This is one of the cases where they're supposed to be left to die. And then we had the opinion of Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon in the Brais. So she'ein chatos tzibor mesa, that actually you should let it graze till it develops a mum, and then you sell it, because you shouldn't leave it to die. Lo nemra halacha dechamesh chatos ala biyachid, because they hold that this halacha l'Moshe Misinai of the 5 chatos that die, that's only by individual carbon chatoses. V'taima de Rabbi Shimon mefarish b'harius uvitzmura. The reason is explained. Leimo leiv bezin masna leim. So the question was, why don't we say the same thing? Let the bezin make a stipulation with these sheyiftu below mum, that they can be redeemed without a blemish. Why don't we apply the same logic by these karbanos? And the Gemara continues and says, Avudin ka'amrit, are you talking here about a situation of animals that got lost and then they were found? Shani avudin, it's different when they get lost, to lo shchiach. That's not something that's common. And if it's something that's not common, so it's not important enough, or it's not frequent enough, it's not common enough, that Bezdin is going to be concerned to make such a stipulation. But the Gemara continues, Hare para de lo shchicha, but what about the para? This is referring to the para aduma, which is not common. Betanya, and over there we learned in a brayso, para niftis al kol psul shaba. When it comes to the para aduma, can be redeemed if there's any kind of disqualification. Mesa tifta, nishchata tifta, if it dies, it can be redeemed. If it's slaughtered, it's redeemed. Matza acheres, noahemena tifta, let's say you find a nicer one than it can be redeemed. Shachta agabe marachta, let's say it was shechted on top of on its maracha. Ein la pedia olamis, so then it says there is no ability to redeem it at all. And Rashi explains, the para aduma de lo shchicha, it's not common. The entire time period of the first and second Beis Hamikdash, there were only 7 para adumas. And so it says over here, I'll call psul shaba, any disqualification. Imira bashum psul tipad, if there's any kind of disqualification, it can be redeemed. Nishchata tifta, let's say it was slaughtered, nishchata chutz l'makoma, meaning it was slaughtered outside of the proper place. Or let's say al gabe ma'arachta, but then it said, let's say it was shechted al gabe ma'arachta, so then the Brisa said, ein la pedio lamis. Rashi says, behechsher bahar al gabe ma'arachta, behechsher bahar ha-mishcha, meaning it was slaughtered properly in the right place on har ha-mishcha. Uvemokom habodak lo mikever hatohom kedamar beperek basar dizvachim, so then ein la pedio lamis. At that point it has no redemption, meaning, me'achar shenasis behechsher, once it was already done properly, ginayu lo tzil l'chul, and already at that point in time, it would be a disgrace that it should now be taken out of its kedusha. So in that situation, when it's shechted properly, so then we're going to say there's no redemption. But in any case, the point over here is that we see the para aduma is able to be redeemed in these various scenarios, and presumably the reason for that is because leiv bezin mas nalei, and apparently there is a stipulation, even though this is a case that is lo shliach, that's not common. And the Gemara continues and answers, shani para, it's different by the para aduma, the kodshe bedek habayis, it's actually considered kodshe bedek habayis, meaning it's not brought on the mizbeach. Kodshe bedek habayis are generally things that are sanctified towards the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains the Kedushas Bedek Habayis, Kilomar, what that means to say is, Eino mi Kodshe Mizbeach. It just means it's not Kodshe Mizbeach, Li Kodesh Kedushas Haguf. It doesn't have that Kedushas Haguf. Lefigach Niftis Below Mum, that's why it can be redeemed without a blemish. Ve'ena Tzricha Leiv Bezdin. You don't need any stipulation from Bezdin when it comes to the Para Aduma. The Para Aduma is a different situation. But the Gemara continues and says, Ihochi, if so, if you're going to say that it has this Kodshe Bedek Habayis, it's not Kedushas Haguf, so then Mesa O Nishchit O Tifta, so then you're saying if it dies or it's slaughtered, it can be redeemed. Don't we need to be able to stand it up and make a valuation of it when it comes to cases like Kedushas Bedek Habayis? And so how is it possible to redeem it in that situation? Rashi explains Hamod v'haracha means Shetamud al Raglat has to be able to stand on his feet. When it dies, when it's shechted, it can't stand on its feet. V'yarichen HaKohen, the Kohen has to be able to evaluate it. K'nechsiv v'hemid es ha'behemo lifnei HaKohen, v'herich HaKohen, that's what it says. You have to stand the animal up before the Kohen, and then the Kohen does this valuation. And so if it's in the category of Kodshe Bedek Habayis, shouldn't that be true? And the Gemara continues in answer to that, Hamani, so who is the author of this Brisa, Rabbi Shimon? This is Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Kodshe Mizbeach Hayu Bechlal Hamod v'Haracha. Rabbi Shimon says it's only Kodshe Mizbeach that are included in the rule of Hamod and Haracha, but Kodshe Bedek Habayis Lo Hayu Bechlal Hamod v'Haracha. But when it comes to Kodshe Bedek Habayis, there is no need for Hamod v'Haracha, and that's why it says over here, that's why it says in this Brisa that when it comes to the Para Aduma, you're able to redeem it in these situations. But the Gemara continues and asks, Rabbi Shimon, but if you're saying this Brisa is Rabbi Shimon, Masechet, let's look at the end of that Brisa. It said, Shachta al gabi marachta, if it's shechted in the proper place, if it's shechted properly, so Ein la pedio lamis, there's no ability to redeem it at all. V'atanya, but yet we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Shimon says, Para mitama tumas ochlin, that the para aduma is mitama tumas ochlin, it's considered to be a food, and it gets that tuma, hoel v'haisal shas hakosher, because it does have a time, there's a time where it's actually kosher. And Rashi explains, Para mitama tumas ochlin means as follows. Avagav the islay Rabbi Shimon, even though Rabbi Shimon holds, Isurei hana, that's something you're not allowed to get benefit from, ein mitam and tumas ochlin, it's not able to have tumas ochlin, it's not considered a food that it can receive that tuma. V'yolef le mikol ochel asher yeyochel, learns that from the pasuk, mikol ochel asher yeyochel, ochel shata yochel lahachilo lacherim, only something that's food that you can give to someone else to eat, karei ochel, only that is called ochel. V'shein ata yochel lahachilo lacherim, and karei ochel, if you're not allowed to give it to someone else to eat, it's asur b'hano, it's not called ochel. Meseches menachos beperek hamenachos v'nesachim upara isurei hanoyim. When it comes to the para aduma, that's isurei hana. But says Rabbi Shimon, mitama tumas ochlin, it does have this tumas ochlin, meaning im noga sheretz bevesara. Let's say a sheretz touches its flesh, the chazar v'noga besara ba'ochlin, and then that basar goes ahead and it touches food. It's timasan. It's going to make it tamei. Hoel v'yesh lo shas hakosher lekach. Since there is a time where it is prepared for that, where it's kosher for that. And the Gemara continues and explains, V'yamar Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish says on this halach of Rabbi Shimon, Omer Hoyer Rabbi Shimon, that what's Rabbi Shimon saying over here when he says that the Parah Haduma has a Shas HaKosher, there is some time where you're allowed to eat it. What does that mean? It's because Rabbi Shimon holds Parah Niftis Al Gav Marachosa, that the Parah Haduma can be redeemed even if it was shechted properly in the proper place. Still, if you find a nicer one, you're able to redeem this, and it can be Yotzei L'chul, and it's able to be eaten. And so you see Rabbi Shimon holds even Al Gabi HaMaracha, even in that situation when it's shechted Al Gav Marachta, even in that situation, Rabbi Shimon says that it's able to be redeemed, not like the Bryce above. It seems like the Bryce above is not Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi explains, Omer Hoyer Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, Shenishcheta kehilchas al gav marachta, that Rabbi Shimon holds, Reish Lakish is explaining what's the Shas HaKosher. It's because Rabbi Shimon holds if it's shechted properly in the proper place, niftis im motzah no himena. Rabbi Shimon goes so far as to say that it can be redeemed if you find a nicer one, you're able to redeem it. Usvir leil Rabbi Shimon ha'omed liftos kepadoi dami. And Rabbi Shimon holds that if it could be redeemed, if it's able to be redeemed in the future, it's like it's redeemed. So he considers it to be a food that you could give to others to eat because of the possibility of this redemption, because Rabbi Shimon goes that far and says it's niftis al gav marachta. And so therefore you can't answer that the brisa above is following Rabbi Shimon, who says that kodshe bedek habayis don't need hamod of haracha. It can't be following Rabbi Shimon, because again, the brisa above said that once it's shechted al gav marachta, so then it's too late to redeem it. You can't redeem it in such a situation. And so the Gemara instead says, Elashani para, rather, the reason why para aduma is different is because hoel v'domeh yukar, and since it's very expensive, so that's why it's different, and that's why we say that it can be redeemed. And Rashi explains, Elalo sukma Rabbi Shimon, don't say the brisa is Rabbi Shimon. And why does it say in the brisa that if you find a nicer one, you can redeem it? Mishum deleiv bezdin masna aleh, because the bezdin makes that stipulation, even though it's not common, and we just said that something not common, the bezdin doesn't make such a stipulation. But I did the yikar, and since it's very expensive, so there already it's something that occurs to the court that they should make that stipulation, and that's why by par aduma they make that stipulation. But again, they don't make a similar stipulation in the cases that we had above, the cases of the avudin, let's say the sireh avodah zarah, etc., those kinds of animals that got lost. That's already something that's not common, and they don't make a stipulation in that situation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, we said above, Mesa Tifta, that if it dies, so then you're able to redeem it, again talking about the Parah Aduma. The Gemara asks, V'chipodenes ha-kodshim la'achilon l'klavim, are you able to redeem kodshim that now you're going to feed it to the dogs? That doesn't make any sense. And so therefore the Gemara is asking again, in a case where it wasn't even slaughtered, how are you redeeming it? That now the only thing you can do with it, if it wasn't slaughtered properly, is to feed it to the dogs. The Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Mesharshir says, Mishum Ora, the reason why you're allowed to redeem this kodshim, even though really it's something that can only be fit to feed to the dogs, is because of the hide. If the hide is usable, that is something that you're not going to feed to the dogs, you can actually use it, and therefore it's able to be redeemed. The Gemara continues, V'kaimi bezdin umasnu adaita da'ora, but would the court actually make a stipulation that you're allowed to redeem it just because of the hide? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Kahana says, Amri Inchi, it's like people say, Migam lo una, from the camel, even its ear is valuable, meaning something that's valuable in general, even a small part of it is valuable. The Parah Aduma is very valuable, so even its hide is so valuable that yes, they would make such a stipulation. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei, we have the following question. Amru lo Rabbi Shimon, they said to Rabbi Shimon, this is a question from our Mishnah, the Chachamim said to Rabbi Shimon, Ma'u sheyikravu zeh bazeh, what's the halacha? Can you bring these karbanos one for a different one? Meaning to say, let's say the goat of the carbon of Yom Kippur, can that be brought on the regalim and the holidays? Amar lahu, so he said to them, Rabbi Shimon said to them, Yikravu, they are able to be brought at these different times. Amru lo, they said back to him, Hoel vein kaparas and shaveh, but if they don't have the exact same kapara, again, each one is a kapara for something else in terms of Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, so hey, chen kraven, so how can you bring one on one of the different days? And so the Mishnah continued, Amar Lahen, he said back to them, Rabbi Shimon said to them, Kulon boin l'chaper al Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, but they all in general, they give a kapara for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, so therefore they can be brought, if they weren't brought at this particular time, or at their particular time, they can be brought at that other time. Let's say again, Yom Kippur, if it wasn't brought on Yom Kippur, it can be brought on the regalim. And so the Gemara continues and asks from the Mishnah, V'yamai, why does Rabbi Shimon respond that since they all come to be mechaper for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, therefore they can be brought on these other days, give a different answer. Lema leif bezin masna lein. The Reb Shimon should simply say that the bezin makes a stipulation that they can be used on the other days. Rashi says, Neim maluhu Rabbi Shimon, leif bezin masna, just say leif bezin masna, shim lo yakriv beregel zeh, yikriv beregel zeh. If they're not brought in this time, then bring it at the other time. Why does he have to give this forced answer that they all come in general to be mechaper for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadashav? And the Gemara continues and answers, Rabbi Shimon Koamrit, are you asking a question from Rabbi Shimon? Rabbi Shimon lesle leiv bezin masna alein. Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold of this idea of leiv bezin masna alein. Amar Ravidi Baravin, Amar Rav Amram, Amar Rav Yochanan, because Ravidi Baravin says, the Rav Amram says, the Rav Yochanan says, Tamidin shelo hutzrachu letzibor. If you have Tamidin carbon tamids that were not used by the community in this particular year, L'divrei Rabbi Shimon ein niftin tamimim. According to Rabbi Shimon, you can't redeem them whole if they don't have a blemish. He doesn't hold of this idea that you can redeem without a blemish. L'divrei Chachamim niftin tamimim. According to the Chachamim, they can be redeemed even if they have no blemishes. And the Gemara continues, V'Rabbanan depligi oled Rabbi Shimon ma'aninu. Now, who are these Rabbanan that argue in Rabbi Shimon? Who are these Rabbanan that say that you're able to redeem them tamimim? Inema Rabbanan de Ketoras. If you're going to say it's the Rabbanan we had earlier by the Ketoras, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph.